summer's definitely over, and this morning we've got all the number 10 staff together and talk through what phase 2 of the government is going to look like and feel like. So we go into phase 2, 1st of September 2025, in good spirits, confident and with conviction about what we're doing. It needs a more powerful number 10, so we've added
the Starmer dilemma, political paralysis at number 10. Right then, before we dive into what might be the most uncomfortable truth about Keir Starmer's premiership, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stay plugged in for what's coming, because what I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change how you see this government. And frankly, it's not pretty. There's one person standing between Britain's economic recovery and complete fiscal catastrophe. One individual whose removal could salvage Starmer's reputation and rescue the nation's finances. Yet our Prime Minister, for all his legal prowess and calculated ruthlessness, cannot bring himself to wield the axe. The question isn't whether he should act, it's whether he's got the political courage to do what everyone knows must be done. The answer, I'm afraid, reveals a weakness at the very heart of number 10 that could destroy this government before it's even properly begun. Now, let's be brutally honest about Keir Starmer. The man's got the charisma of a damp Yorkshire tea towel and the inspirational qualities of a particularly dreary Tuesday afternoon in Middlesbrough. He's an attorney masquerading as a politician, someone who understands legal precedent far better than he grasps the art of moving hearts and minds. But here's the thing, and this might surprise you, he actually knows what needs doing. It's not rocket science, is it? Economic growth. That's the magic bullet that solves nearly every political headache. Get the economy humming at 3% annual growth, and suddenly voters forget their grievances. Money in people's pockets is a remarkable way of improving government approval ratings. It's when daily existence becomes a grinding struggle that the public starts looking for scapegoats. And guess who's first in the firing line? Starmer grasps this fundamental truth. He understands that Britain's stench of decline, that lingering odor of managed mediocrity that's been hanging over these isles, would dissipate rather quickly if people felt genuinely prosperous again. The boats crossing the channel? Easier to manage when you're not simultaneously managing economic desperation. The mounting cost of health and disability benefits, currently devouring over £50 billion annually and projected to exceed £75 billion by the end of this parliament. These problems become manageable when you've got a growing economy to fund solutions rather than simply manage decline. But if you're still watching and haven't subscribed, seriously, what are you waiting for? The analysis you're getting here isn't available anywhere else, and there's much more where this came from. The Prime Minister even understands the immigration challenge with unusual clarity. He knows that controlled, legal, beneficial immigration fills genuine labor shortages, whilst uncontrolled migration creates social tensions that benefit nobody except political extremists. This is precisely why he appointed Shabana Mahmood as Home Secretary, someone with a steel to make decisions that would leave liberal sensibilities rather queasy. It was a calculated move by a man who, whatever his limitations, isn't afraid to make enemies when necessary. So far, so competent. Starmer may lack the common touch, but has correctly diagnosed Britain's ailments. He knows growth is paramount, immigration must be controlled, and welfare costs need containing. These aren't particularly controversial positions. They are basic governmental competence, which makes his paralysis over Ed Miliband all the more baffling and, frankly, infuriating. Miliband, as Energy Secretary, holds perhaps the most crucial economic portfolio in government. British energy costs are absolutely crippling our industrial base. Households are paying £1,755 annually for gas and electricity, whilst British manufacturers face electricity costs of roughly £80 per megawatt hour compared to about £28 in the United States. These aren't marginal differences. They're economy-destroying disparities that make British industry uncompetitive on the global stage. The predictable result? Companies are relocating to countries with cheaper energy, taking jobs and tax revenue with them. It's economic vandalism dressed up as environmental virtue, and Miliband is a chief architect of this destruction. Instead of focusing laser-like on reducing energy costs, what does our Energy Secretary prioritize? Ideological warfare against the energy sector, green taxes that add billions to consumer bills, punitive levies that handicap energy companies, a blanket ban on new North Sea licenses that forces us to import more expensive energy from abroad, and billions, Literally billions, wasted on unproven technologies like carbon capture and blue hydrogen that exist more in PowerPoint presentations than in practical reality. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and if you're finding this analysis valuable, don't forget to subscribe because this is exactly the kind of insight you will get regularly on UK Connors. Last week, Starmer attempted what should have been a routine reshuffle. Out went former Foreign Secretary David Lammy and Yvette Cooper. Both moved without particular drama. But when the Prime Minister's attention turned to Miliband, something extraordinary happened. The Energy Secretary simply refused to budge. Can you imagine? A cabinet minister effectively telling the Prime Minister to do one, and getting away with it. The humiliation was complete and public. Here was Starmer, supposedly the ruthless operator who'd purged the Labour left and transformed his party's electoral prospects, being defied by a man whose political judgment gave us Brexit and handed power to David Cameron. It would be laughable if it weren't so damaging. This brings us to the crux of the matter, the heart of Britain's current predicament, and why Starmer finds himself trapped between economic necessity and political survival. If this were simply about one stubborn cabinet minister, the solution would be straightforward. Starmer has demonstrated sufficient ruthlessness throughout his career, from his time as Director of Public Prosecutions to his systematic dismantling of Jeremy Corbyn's influence within Labour. He is perfectly capable of political brutality when circumstances demand it, but Miliband's survival isn't about personal loyalty or individual defiance. It's about the fundamental character of the Labour Party itself, and this is where Starmer's real weakness is exposed. The difficult choices required for genuine economic growth are precisely the choices that horrify Labour activists and backbenchers. They've spent decades in opposition crafting beautiful theories about how Britain should work: more public spending, higher taxes on wealth creators, environmental policies that prioritize symbolism over practicality, benefit systems that prioritize compassion over incentives to work. These ideas aren't necessarily wrong in principle, but they are luxuries we simply cannot afford whilst the economy remains stagnant. Growth must come first. Everything else, the generous public services, the environmental leadership, the comprehensive welfare state, these are the fruits of economic success, not its preconditions. And this is where you should definitely subscribe if you haven't already, because understanding this fundamental tension is crucial to grasping British politics for the next decade. Miliband represents everything Labour activists believe about how government should work. He is the walking embodiment of their environmental conscience, their suspicion of market mechanisms, their faith in state intervention over private enterprise. To remove him wouldn't just be reshuffling a cabinet, it would be repudiating the ideological foundations that many Labour members hold dear. Starmer knows this. He understands that Miliband is the single greatest obstacle to economic recovery, the individual whose policies are actively preventing the growth that could transform Britain's prospects. But he also knows that removing Miliband would trigger a civil war within his own party that could destroy his authority and split Labour just as it's finally returned to power. So we have this extraordinary situation. A Prime Minister who correctly diagnoses a problem, understands the solution, possesses a technical ability to implement it, yet finds himself politically paralyzed by his own party's inability to accept economic reality. The consequences are already visible and will only worsen. Every month that Miliband remains in post is another month of economic self-harm. Companies continue relocating abroad. Energy costs remain prohibitively high. The gap between Britain and our international competitors widens. The very voters who gave Labour its mandate grow increasingly frustrated with their deteriorating living standards. Meanwhile, the opposition watches with barely concealed delight as Labour tears itself apart over the fundamental question of whether economic growth or ideological purity should take precedence. The Conservatives, for all their recent chaos, at least maintained a basic commitment to wealth creation. Labour appears unable to decide whether it wants to grow the economy or simply redistribute its decline more fairly. The tragedy is that Starmer probably has 18 months, perhaps 2 years at most, before voters lose patience entirely. That's a window for demonstrating that Labour can deliver the prosperity it promised. Every day that passes with Miliband destroying industrial competitiveness is a day closer to electoral oblivion. Yet the Prime Minister remains frozen, caught between economic necessity and political survival, knowing what must be done but lacking the courage to do it. It's a masterclass in how ideological capture can paralyze even competent governance, and why parties that prioritize internal harmony over national interest ultimately serve neither. The most damning aspect of this entire debacle is that it was entirely predictable and completely avoidable. Everyone knew that Labour's environmental wing would resist the hard choices required for growth. Everyone understood that returning to power would mean confronting the gap between opposition rhetoric and governmental reality. Yet here we are, watching in real time as these tensions tear apart Britain's economic recovery before it's even begun. So there you have it, the uncomfortable truth about Keir Starmer's premiership. He knows what needs doing, understands the obstacles, and possesses the technical competence to succeed. But when faced with a defining choice of his administration, economic recovery or party unity, he's chosen paralysis over leadership, leaving Britain trapped in managed decline whilst our competitors surge ahead. The only question now is whether voters will be more forgiving of economic failure or political cowardice. Based on electoral history, I suspect we're about to find out, and the answer won't be pleasant for anyone involved. That's the reality of British politics in 2025, a government that knows the right answers but lacks the courage to implement them, led by a Prime Minister trapped by his own party's inability to accept economic reality. Subscribe to UK Connors for more unflinching analysis of where British politics is heading, because frankly, somebody needs to tell the uncomfortable truths that the mainstream media keeps avoiding.